The rain hammered against the windows of my small apartment in downtown Seattle as I stared at my empty bank account on the laptop screen. Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, had just watched her life savings vanish into thin air. The number that once read $47,000 now showed a devastating $230, barely enough to cover next week's groceries. My mother's voice echoed in my mind from our phone call 3 months ago. "It's just temporary, honey. You know I'm good for it." I had been naive, trusting the woman who raised me when she claimed she needed the money for her business investment. Mom had always been persuasive, charming even, with her silver tongue and warm smile that could melt anyone's resolve. She painted pictures of a small bakery she wanted to open in Portland, describing the aroma of fresh bread and the community she'd build around it. "This is my dream, Sarah. Help me make it real, and I'll pay you back with interest within 6 months." But 6 months had passed, and every call I made was met with excuses, deflections, and eventually, cruel laughter. Yesterday's conversation replayed in my head like a broken record, each word cutting deeper than the last. The way she dismissed my financial struggles, the casual cruelty in her voice when she said I'd never see that money again. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, knowing I had to try one more time. The familiar ringtone felt like a countdown to heartbreak as I waited for her to answer. When she did, her voice was light, almost musical, as if she hadn't destroyed her daughter's financial future. "Oh, Sarah, darling, you're not calling about that money again, are you?" The dismissive tone made my stomach churn, but I pressed on, explaining how I couldn't afford rent, how I'd had to cancel my health insurance, how I was living on instant noodles and hope. Her response shattered what little faith I had left in family bonds. "You were always too trusting, too soft. That money is gone, sweetheart. I spent it on something much better than your little savings account." The laughter that followed was like ice water in my veins, cold and shocking. She continued, "You'll never see that money again. And honestly, it's about time you learned how the real world works. Your father would be disappointed in how weak you've become." As I hung up the phone, tears streaming down my face, I felt something shift inside me. The grief and desperation began to transform into something harder, more focused. I wiped my eyes and looked around my sparse apartment, taking in the secondhand furniture and the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen table. My mother thought she had won, thought she had gotten away with betraying her own daughter. But what she didn't know was that I had been recording our conversations for weeks, and I had just made a very important phone call to someone who could help me fight back. The law office of Martinez and Associates sat tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, its modest exterior hiding one of the city's most tenacious legal minds. Elena Martinez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steel in her voice, had built her reputation defending the vulnerable against those who exploited family trust. As I sat across from her mahogany desk, the recordings of my conversations with my mother played through her computer speakers, each cruel word hanging in the air like evidence of a crime. "Sarah, what your mother has done isn't just morally reprehensible. It's legally actionable," Elena said, her fingers steepled as she studied my case file. The office smelled of leather and coffee, creating an atmosphere of serious business tempered with warmth. "The fact that she admitted to taking your money with no intention of repaying it, combined with these recordings, gives us a strong foundation for a fraud case. Family relationships don't grant immunity from the law." I had spent the past 2 weeks gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Bank transfers, text messages, the original promissory note my mother had reluctantly signed, and most damning of all, the recorded conversations where she admitted to her deception. Elena's paralegal, a sharp young woman named Jessica, had helped me organize everything into a comprehensive case file. "Your mother made a critical error," Elena explained. "She assumed that because you're her daughter, you wouldn't fight back. She underestimated your strength." The strategy session stretched into the evening as we mapped out our approach. Elena explained that we would file both criminal and civil charges, seeking not just the return of my money, but also damages for the emotional distress and financial hardship caused by my mother's betrayal. She's been living in Portland under the assumption that she's untouchable, Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Tomorrow, we'll serve her with papers that will change that assumption dramatically. As I left the office that night, walking through the cool Seattle evening with the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I could see a path forward. My mother thought she had taken everything from me, but she had underestimated the power of documentation and the law's ability to protect the innocent from family predators. I returned to my apartment with a new sense of purpose, organizing my evidence one final time and preparing for the battle ahead. Tomorrow would bring the first phase of justice, and I would face it with the strength I had discovered in my darkest hour. My mother had taught me a valuable lesson about trust, but she was about to learn an even more important one about consequences. The process server found my mother at her favorite coffee shop in Portland's Pearl District, where she held court with her book club every Tuesday morning. According to the report Elena received, Mom had been regaling her friends with stories of her silly daughter, who kept pestering her about money when the official documents were placed in her hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was literally laughing about my desperation when reality came crashing down around her carefully constructed facade. Her phone call came exactly 47 minutes after she was served, the timestamp on my recording app marking the beginning of her panic. "Sarah, what the hell is this?" she screamed into the phone, her usually composed voice cracking with genuine fear. "You're suing your own mother? Over money? This is insane." The transformation from cruel confidence to desperate pleading was so complete that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Mom, you told me I'd never see that money again," I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You laughed at me when I explained how your theft was destroying my life. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds before she began a frantic stream of excuses, promises, and threats that I dutifully recorded for Elena's review. Elena's strategy was working perfectly. The combination of criminal fraud charges and civil litigation had created a two-pronged attack that left my mother scrambling to find legal representation. Her initial lawyer, a family friend who specialized in real estate, had quickly referred her to a criminal defense attorney after reviewing the evidence. "Your mother is discovering that the legal system doesn't care about family dynamics when fraud is involved," Elena explained during our Wednesday update meeting. The psychological pressure was evident in my mother's increasingly erratic behavior. Her social media posts, once filled with inspirational quotes and photos of her expensive lifestyle, had ceased entirely. Friends reported that she had become withdrawn, canceling social engagements and avoiding public appearances. The woman who had built her identity around projecting success and control was watching that facade crumble under the weight of legal scrutiny. As I sat in my apartment that evening, reviewing the case updates Elena had provided, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The satisfaction came from seeing justice in motion, from watching the legal system work exactly as it should to protect victims of family fraud. The sadness came from the realization that my relationship with my mother was irreparably damaged, that the woman who had raised me had chosen greed over her daughter's well-being. The mediation session took place in a sterile conference room in downtown Portland, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. My mother sat across from me, her usual polished appearance replaced by dark circles under her eyes and hands that trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Chen, had clearly explained the gravity of the situation, because the defiant woman from our phone conversations had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. "Mrs. Mitchell, you need to understand that the evidence against you is overwhelming," Elena began, her voice professional but firm. "Your recorded admissions of fraud, combined with the documented financial transfers, and your daughter's testimony, create a case that any prosecutor would love to take to trial. However, my client is willing to consider a settlement that would resolve both the criminal and civil matters." My mother's eyes darted between Elena and me, searching for any sign of weakness or forgiveness. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could figure something out, maybe start a business and pay you back with profits." The excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears, and Patricia Chen's slight headshake suggested she knew how weak her client's position had become. The settlement terms were straightforward: full restitution of the $47,000 plus interest, an additional $15,000 in damages for emotional distress, and a formal admission of guilt that would be filed with the court. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue the criminal charges, allowing my mother to avoid potential jail time. "You have 48 hours to decide," Elena stated firmly. "After that, we proceed to trial, and the offer is permanently withdrawn." As we prepared to leave the mediation, my mother grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and pleading. "Sarah, please, I know I hurt you, but I'm still your mother. Doesn't that mean anything anymore?" Her eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine, but the months of manipulation and cruelty had hardened my heart beyond her reach. "It meant everything, Mom," I replied quietly. "That's why this hurts so much." The drive back to Seattle felt like a journey between two different worlds. In Portland, I had confronted the woman who had betrayed me, seen the consequences of her actions written across her face. In Seattle, I was returning to rebuild my life with the promise of justice and restitution. The city lights welcomed me home as I crossed the bridge, their reflection in the water like stars pointing toward a future I could finally believe in again. The cashier's check arrived by certified mail on a gray Thursday morning, the official bank seal confirming that my mother had accepted the settlement terms. $62,000, my original savings plus interest and damages, represented more than just financial recovery. It was validation that standing up to family abuse had been the right choice. I held the check in my hands, feeling its weight both literally and symbolically, before carefully depositing it through my bank's mobile app. Elena called within hours of the settlement being finalized, her voice carrying a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal warmth. "Sarah, I've been practicing law for 15 years, and cases like yours remind me why I chose to specialize in family fraud," she said. "Your courage to document everything and fight back will help other victims realize they're not powerless. Your mother's formal admission of guilt is now part of the public record, and that accountability matters. The money allowed me to reclaim my life in ways I had almost forgotten were possible. I paid off my credit cards, restocked my empty refrigerator, and renewed my health insurance. But more importantly, I began the process of rebuilding my sense of self-worth and trust in my own judgment. The experience had taught me that family relationships, while precious, don't exempt anyone from basic human decency and legal responsibility. 6 months later, I received an unexpected letter from my mother, not through lawyers this time, but sent directly to my apartment. Her handwriting was shaky, uncertain, as she attempted to explain her actions and express remorse. "I know I destroyed something irreplaceable between us," she wrote. "I lost my daughter's trust and respect for money that's already gone. I understand if you never want to see me again, but I needed you to know that I'm getting help and trying to understand how I became someone capable of hurting you so deeply." I read the letter twice before setting it aside, unsure of how to respond, or if I even wanted to. The financial wound had healed, but the emotional scars would take much longer to fade. Some relationships, once broken by betrayal, can never be fully repaired. But as I looked around my apartment, now furnished with new belongings purchased with my recovered money, I realized that I had gained something valuable from this painful experience. Standing by my window, watching the Seattle skyline stretch toward the horizon, I understood that justice sometimes comes quietly, not through dramatic confrontations or public vindication, but through the simple act of refusing to accept abuse and using the law to protect yourself when family fails you. My mother had been wrong about one thing. I did see that money again. But more importantly, I had seen my own strength. and that was worth more than any amount she could have stolen.